Okay, the second part of how cults work. Um, Cult life and death. Uh, 900 dead bodies at the People's Temple compound in Jonestown, Indiana. Huh. Well, I already knew that. I didn't know it spread to me. I mean, I was in that day. There is no single deception that fits the lifestyle of every destructive cult out there. But there are some common themes many ex-cult members depict. A type of insulated moment-to-moment existence in which repressing fear and anxiety is job one. Chanting and meditation become prime coping mechanisms in this regard. Cut off from the family, old friends, and the outside world. Their old life becomes like a dream in their new life. Psychological growth just stops. Cult members are caught in a static life that depends on not thinking, not questioning, not wondering, not remembering. Children raised in destructive cult are stunned early. They do not usually attend school, and the cult may or may not provide its children with an education. Cults need food, shelter, and clothing like everyone else, and unless they have wealthy benefactors or they're truly isolated, living in a jungle and growing their own food, that means they need money. Some cults make money to sustain themselves by legitimate means. The Heaven's Gate cult in San Diego, California had been running a successful web design business before they committed mass suicide in 1997. Some cults commit crimes like fraud and tax evasion to help support themselves. They may use deceptive fundraising techniques or require that new recruits make significant financial contributions to support the rest of the cult. I want to back up when they say mass suicide. That's what, just like Jonestown, that's what these people, it always ends up this way. They are all killed in some way or another. Either they kill themselves or just like the guy down in Waco, Texas. They were killed. I mean, it's just weird. Above all else, life in a totalist cult is typically characterized by tight control. There is very little freedom in daily life. The leader prescribes what a member can and cannot do for every minute of the day. This includes what food he can eat, what books he can read, whom he can talk to, what he can wear, where he can go, and how long he can sleep. The leader makes decisions and the followers do as they're told. For some people, living this way is a relief. Life is simple. There are no unanswered questions, no uncertainty, no worrying about the future or managing conflicting desires. Some people's lives on the outside were so bad that the cult is in reality a safe, happy place. But in a lot of cases, this type of lifestyle causes intense psychological distress. Many people experience persistent fear of angering the leader or losing group approval. They must consistently avoid the tension between their cult world and their former life and stifle any doubts or longings that arise. In some cases, there is also the possibility of physical harm. Punishment for disobedience might be physical, and cult members are typically cut off from hospitals and regular medical care. Some studies show that children in destructive cults are more likely to be abused or neglected than in any general population. This level of stress can lead to chronic anxiety, physical illness, or even complete mental breakdown, in which a cult member may become unable to function in daily life. It's the people who experience cult life as a stressful who are most likely to leave voluntarily. In the next section, we'll find out what options people have when it comes to getting out of destructive cults. Okay, here's notable cult incidents. We all know this one. The San Diego, 1997 San Diego Heaven's Gate. Members commit suicide by overdose and suffocation. 1994 and 1995 Canada, Switzerland, France. Order of the Solar Temple. More than 65 members and former members die in a series of mass murders and suicides. 1993, Waco, Texas, Branch Davidian. 80 members die by fire and gunshots during a confrontation with the FBI and ATF. 1978, Jonestown, Guyana, the People's Temple, cult leader Jim Jones. More than 900 members die in a mass murder suicide by poison and gunshots. This is another one. 1969, Los Angeles, California. The Manson family. Charles Manson and his followers commit mass murder that leaves 9 people brutally slaughtered over the course of 2 weeks. Man, I won't dare to all this through all this stuff. Hey. See what the next one does. Getting out of a cult. Okay, getting out of a cult is more difficult than getting into one. People might voluntarily leave cult for any number of reasons. Some cult members become disillusioned and just walk out. This was the case with the Davidians, a precursor group to the Branch Davidians. The leader of the Davidians predicted the end of the world on a particular date. Sound familiar? End of the world? When that date came and went, some members were disappointed. The leader predicted a new date, and that date came and went. Would the world enact well? By the time the leader died and his wife took over, he uh, and predicted a new series of dates that failed to see the destruction of the world, there were very few members left in the group. For some people, it's not that difficult to leave. Some individuals are just less susceptible to mind control techniques than others, and they may have retained enough of a sense of self to make an informed decision to walk out. But it's usually not that simple. There are ex-cultists who say they spent years working up the nerve to get out. A true convert is completely dependent on the cult for every aspect of life and consciousness. To the truly indoctrinated cult member, leaving means being alone and starting over. His sense of self has been completely broken down to the point that he doesn't even know who he is without his cult family. He may not have made a decision in years, gathering the confidence to voluntarily have a totalist cult requires a tremendous act of will and doesn't come easily. It might result from renewed contact with the outside world, such as a cult member. Speaking with the parents for the first time in a decade, it might happen when a cult member has a psychological breakdown and believes she is so simply too worthless to meet the expectations of the group. So she leaves to spare her cult family the weariness of her presence, or it might come about feeling a particularly dramatic experience that jolts the cult member into consciousness, such as witnessing the sexual assault of a child or a murder within a cult. But making the decision to leave is only part of the process. The cult has to unlock the door, so to speak, in order for the member to get out. Some destructive cults do let people leave. Usually they'll put a lot of pressure on a member to stay, but in the end, the person can choose to go and not have to climb a barbed wire fence in the dead of night or sneak past any armed guards in the midst cases causes a member who leaves may be disowned by a cult, forbidden any contact with the people that have been her family for months, years, or decades. But the member won't suffer any physical harm when she walks out. In the most severe cases, though, a cult may stop at nothing to maintain control over its members, and a person may fear her life if she tries to leave. When 16 members of the People's Temple in Jonestown, Guyana, decided they wanted to leave the cult in 1978 following a visit from the U.S. government group. Several armed cult members followed them to the airport and opened fire. They injured 11 people and killed a U.S. congressman, 3 reporters, and 1 member who was trying to leave. Fear of consequences of this incident is what triggered leader Jim Jones to initiate the mass suicide and murder of 900 members of the cult. You ought to look up and listen to this thing. It's the saddest thing I ever seen. I mean, I was there. I mean, I wasn't in this cult, but I seen this stuff unfold on TV. While a peaceful, voluntary exit is certainly the preferred method of leaving a cult, it doesn't always happen that way. There are those who don't want to escape all but are grabbed from their beds at 3 in the morning and dragged back into the outside world. This is typically the first stage, is what is known as deprogramming, which is an extreme method of removing someone from a cult against their will. It is not easy to get someone to leave a destructive cult. Talking is always the first step, but sometimes the cultist is too well indoctrinated to really hear anything an outsider has to say. And other times there is no opportunity to talk at all. A cult member may have several ties to the outside world. Family members who fear for a loved one who's deeply involved in the totalist cult have to find another option if simply talking is impossible or doesn't work. At this point, they can go one of 2 ways: deprogramming or exit counseling. On the next page, we'll discuss the deprogramming. Overcoming the charisma of the cult leaders such as Jim Jones is not an easy task. Deprogramming is the most drastic of the 2 approaches because it usually involves an initial kidnapping to get the cult member away from the cult. For the reason of deprogramming is a very expensive service. It can cost in the tens of thousands of dollars. After the forced removal, deprogramming most involves hours and hours of intense debriefing, during which a team of deprogrammers hold the cult member against his will and use ethical psychological techniques to try to counter the unethical psychological techniques used by the cult. The goal is to get the cult member to think for himself and reevaluate the situation. Debriefing methods can include educating the cult member on thought reform techniques and helping him to recognize those methods in his own cult experience. Asking questions that encourages the cult member to think in a critical, independent way, helping him to recognize that the type of thinking and praising him for it. Attempting to produce an emotional connection in his former life by introducing objects from the past and having family members share their members of pre-cult existence. Deprogramming was relatively common in the 1970s, but has fallen out of favor as an acceptable cult removal method, partly because of it's so expensive, partly because it involves kidnapping and imprisonment, and partly because that kidnapping and imprisonment lead to a lot of lawsuits over the years. Now, the most familiar term to exit counselors, exit counseling leaves out of kidnapping and focusing instead on employing psychological techniques that might get the cult member to voluntarily submit to debriefing. Exit counseling or counselors guides the family the most effective ways to get the cult member to communicate with outsiders. Family members must be non-judgmental, calm, and loving, or else they'll only reinforce the belief that all the outsiders are bad and dangerous. If they succeed and the cult member agrees to participate in the process, that happens next is essentially the same debriefing that occurs during programming, with long sessions that take place over a number of days, but the cult member is free to leave. There's no guarantee that any cult removal technique will work. Some sources say that at least 1/3 of deprogramming fail, and there is no definitive statistics on the success of rate of exit counseling. But when it does work, the cult member finds himself back in the outside world with a whole new set of problems. People who leave a totalist cult can suffer from a laundry list of psychological problems. Some common ones include depression, anxiety, paranoia, guilt, rage, and constant fear. They may have difficulty thinking clearly, making decisions, and analyzing situations, and performing everyday activities like picking out something to wear or going to the store to buy groceries. Psychologist Michael Langone describes a common post-cult state he calls floating, in which the former member goes back and forth from cult to non-cult ways of viewing the world, stalled in foggy in-between state of consciousness. Not everybody is psychologically damaged by a cult experience. Some go on with their lives after a relatively short adjustment period, but most people who have undergone thought reform suffer negative consequences when they leave the insulated environment of the cult. It can take years for a former cult member to readjust to life on the outside. Some people never completely return to their pre-cult level of functioning. But in most cult cases, counseling and family support can go a long way toward recovery. For more information on destructive cults and related topics, including links to organizations that help people who've been hurt by cult involvement, check out the links below. I'll leave a link for this here so you can get, if you want any more information, you can look these links up. But I thought that was pretty interesting. Now we get a little perspective on Mr. Jonathan Kleck, cult leader, top of the list for this dang era, or decade, I guess we would call it. But you know, it's pretty interesting on some of this stuff. But yeah, if you want, you know, like I'll leave the link here, and you can look for the other stuff if you like. I leave this to you in the name of Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior, and we love you, and God bless you all. Thank you.